If you opened Netflix in 2005, it looked nothing like it does today, and in 2035, today's websites will look just as outdated. In today's video, we're embarking on a 30-year web design history journey, where we'll identify how new tools shaped every era of design, and what's coming next. It's August 6th of 1991, and Tim Berners-Lee just published the first website ever made, but it has no images or styling, just hyperlinks and paragraphs. Because at that point, HTML was built for one thing only: sharing scientific documents. Design wasn't even a consideration. So, for the next few years, every site on the web looked identical. Plain background, black text, blue links. Until HTML 2.0 dropped in 1995. This is where things started getting interesting. HTML 2.0 brought images, tables, and forms, and suddenly designers had something to work with. Tables were supposed to display data, rows and columns of spreadsheet information, but designers saw an opportunity. They realized they could nest tables inside tables, slice Photoshop mockups into grids, and fake complex layouts. It was messy, it was hacky, but it worked. For the first time, websites could have sidebars, headers, multi-column layouts. They looked crude, but they looked designed. And then the personalities started flooding in. Animated GIFs of construction workers hammering away. Visitor counters proudly announcing, "You are visitor number 127. Blinking text screaming for attention. Starry backgrounds. Guest books where complete strangers left messages like, "Cool site, check mine out." Things were getting a bit messy. Then in 1996, Macromedia Flash arrived, and everything changed. Flash gave designers what HTML couldn't: animations, vector graphics, sound, and full interactivity. For the first time, you could build experiences, not just pages. Look at MTV's early website. Splash screens with animated logos, 3D buttons, music videos you could actually watch in browser, or Jackie Chan's personal homepage. Flash animations, martial arts effects, and sound effects that played when you hovered over buttons. Apple sites started using JavaScript menus with smooth transitions. Nike built entire interactive campaigns. Cartoon Network had games you could play directly on their site. These weren't just websites anymore, they were productions. But Flash had a fatal flaw, which ultimately led to its downfall. It required a plugin. If you didn't have Flash Player installed, you saw nothing, just a blank box and a download plugin message. It was slow, it crashed browsers, and search engines couldn't read it, so Flash-heavy sites were basically invisible to Google. The 90s were the Wild West. Nobody had design systems or user research, they had raw markup, a few tools, and pure experimentation. And here's the pattern forming. The tools defined what was possible. In 1998, CSS, cascading style sheets, started gaining traction. CSS did something revolutionary. It separated content from presentation. Before CSS, if you wanted to change the font color across your entire site, you had to manually edit every single page. With CSS, you could write one rule and it applied everywhere. Designers suddenly had control over typography, spacing, colors, layouts, without touching the HTML. Things were looking good for the early internet, but the web was about to grow up. In the early 2000s, broadband internet and 32-bit color arrived. Instead of the slow connection that crashed all the time and the limited 256 color palette, designers could now use 16 million colors and build visually rich sites with high-quality images, smooth gradients, and multimedia content that actually loaded in seconds. This was revolutionary. And then, in 2003, WordPress launched. And overnight, non-technical people could build websites. WordPress gave you themes, plugins, and a content management system. You didn't need to know code. You just picked up a template, installed some plugins, and started publishing. By 2005, over 8 million websites were running on WordPress. But something else was happening in parallel. Google was getting smarter. In the early 2000s, Google started crawling and ranking websites, and suddenly it wasn't enough to just have a site. You needed a site that Google could find. Also, businesses started realizing that the web wasn't just a novelty, it was the future. This is when SEO became a thing. Designers had to think about structure, navigation, page speed, meta tags, because if Google couldn't understand your site, your business was invisible. So people started competing, and the content and website started getting better and better because of it. And then Web 2.0 hit. If you're old enough to remember this era, MySpace launched in 2003, Facebook in 2004, and YouTube in 2005. And by the way, they look absolutely nothing like they do today. Social media took the world by storm. The web stopped being a broadcast medium and became a conversation. User-generated content exploded. Profile pages, comment sections, widgets you could embed, customizable layouts where teenagers made their MySpace pages look like glittery nightmares. Ask me how I know. Websites weren't just about companies anymore. They were about people. In the 90s, the question was, do I have a website? In the 2000s, the question became, is my website usable, discoverable, and fast? The tools evolved. CSS gave us control, WordPress gave us speed, and Google gave us accountability. Notice the pattern here. Every time complexity grows, we invent abstractions. CSS abstracted styling from HTML. WordPress abstracted code from content. CMS themes abstracted design from development. And today, AI is just the next abstraction layer, but we'll get to that. The biggest shift of the 2000s was still coming, because in 2007, Steve Jobs walked on stage and held up a device that would change web design forever, the iPhone. A phone with a full web browser, no stylus, no keyboard, just your finger and a 3.5-inch screen. But suddenly, designers realized they had a new problem, because every website on the internet was built for desktop monitors, mouse clicks, hover states. None of that worked on a phone. At first, websites just shrunk. You'd pinch and zoom to read tiny text. Buttons were impossible to tap. Navigation menus were buried. It was a disaster. But by 2010, a designer named Ethan Marcotte coined a term that would define the next decade. Responsive design meant your website adapted to the screen size. One site, multiple layouts. On desktop, you see a full navigation bar, sidebars, multi-column layouts. On mobile, everything stacked vertically. Navigation collapsed into a hamburger menu and images scaled down. CSS media queries made this possible. If you could write rules like, if the screen is smaller than 768 pixels, do this. And just like that, designing for one screen became designing for every screen. But responsive design wasn't just about making things fit, it changed how designers thought. Scrolling became the primary navigation, pages got longer, parallax effects emerged, and content-first layouts replaced sidebar-heavy designs. And mobile traffic exploded. By 2015, more people were browsing the web on phones than desktops. If your site wasn't mobile-friendly, you were losing half your audience. Around the same time, flat design took over. Skeuomorphism, the fake leather textures, glossy buttons, realistic shadows, died almost overnight. Apple led the charge with iOS 7 in 2013. Everything became flat, minimal, geometric, because flat design was faster to load, easier to scale, and worked better on high-resolution Retina displays. Designers stopped trying to make digital interfaces look like physical objects. They embraced that screens were screens. By the mid-2010s, the modern web aesthetic had arrived. Tons of white space, clean typography, card-based layouts, and subtle animations. And frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation made this style accessible to everyone. You didn't need to be a CSS wizard anymore. You just installed a framework, and you had a professional-looking, mobile-responsive site out of the box. But here's what was happening behind the scenes. Design systems were emerging. Companies like Airbnb, Google, and IBM realized they couldn't just design pages anymore. They needed reusable components, style guides, and design tokens. A button wasn't just a button, it was a component with defined sizes, states, colors, and spacing rules. Design became systematic, scalable, and repeatable. And tools like Sketch, then Figma, gave designers the ability to build these systems collaboratively. By 2010, responsive design was the standard. Flat, minimal aesthetics dominated, and design systems kept everything consistent. But designers were still doing the same thing they've always done, starting with blank canvases and manually placing every pixel, until AI entered the picture. Nobody was ready for what was about to happen. ChatGPT launched in November 2022, and suddenly everyone was using AI for everything. Tools like DALL-E and Midjourney started generating images from text prompts. People were creating art, photography, illustrations, all without touching Photoshop. And designers started asking, if AI can generate images, can it generate interfaces? So, by 2023, AI design tools started emerging. UX Pilot, VO by Vercel, Framer started integrating AI. Some of these tools allowed you to type something like e-commerce checkout page, and in seconds, you'd get a complete design. This felt revolutionary, but there was a catch. Early AI design tools looked impressive, but they didn't fit into real workflows. They generated isolated screens, no flows, no user journeys, no connection between pages, and they couldn't use your brand's design system. But by 2024, the second wave of AI design tools solved this. Tools like UX Pilot started approaching design differently. Instead of asking for one screen, you gave it a product brief, a real PRD, enabled autoflow, and it didn't just generate one screen, it generated your entire user journey. Login, onboarding, dashboard, billing, everything. Also, designers were now able to import their own design systems, their buttons, forms, colors, typography, and components. They were now generating screens that matched their brand instead of random work. This time, they were able to go from idea to an actual usable AI. Design went from manually writing code to describing what you want in plain English. And when something needs adjustment, you don't start over. You edit sections, swap colors, update layouts, iterate without rebranding. In the 90s, designers were coders. You had to know HTML. In the 2000s, designers were visual artists. You had to master Photoshop. In the 2010s, designers were system architects. You had to build component libraries. In 2025, designers are product strategists. You define the vision, the flows, user experience, the brand, AI handles the execution. And when you're done, you export to Figma or push to code, real files, real components, production ready. Web design went from manual HTML to table hacks, to Flash productions, to CSS control, to responsive thinking, to component systems. And now, AI is giving us leverage. Every era had a tool shift, and every time, designers who adapted early had a massive advantage. They weren't replaced, they were empowered. The same thing is happening right now. Design will keep evolving, new styles will emerge, new trends, new ways of thinking, and tools like UX Pilot will keep pace, making it easier to go from concept to production-ready design faster than ever before. The designers who win in the next decade won't be the ones with the best Figma skills. They'll be the ones who learned to direct AI like a creative partner. If you want to try it for yourself, there's a free trial link for UX Pilot in the description. And if you're curious where this is all heading, subscribe, because we're just scratching the surface.